Hello and welcome to our podcast at Get Legally Speaking. Our legal conversation today will be on domestic violence during the COVID-19 crisis. I am joined today, and we are recording remotely, with Miss Freya Rowe from Thomas More Chambers in Lincoln's Inn in London. Freya is an outstanding senior family law barrister who is passionate in her efforts with earned credit from the High Court and the County Courts. She has conducted many seminars setting out useful crossovers between family and crime. And Freya has extensive experience in complex domestic violence cases. Thank you very much for joining us, Freya.
Thank you very much for having me, Hattie.
I'm going to say, Freya asked if we could record this podcast on domestic violence during this crisis. And today's the 7th of April, 2020. So all the information we'll be discussing is current as of today. And I really was pleased to be able to do it. And we've sort of put it together very quickly. And I was only saying to Freya just before we press the record button, how astonished I have been whilst researching what's going on out there in relation to domestic violence. And I mean, the BBC reported yesterday that domestic abuse calls are up 25% since the lockdown.
Yes.
We're really just entering into our third week of the lockdown, Freya. So I'm really pleased that we're doing this. Thank you, Freya, again for.
It's a great pleasure. It's a very important issue because obviously it's common sense, isn't it? That if you're in a very volatile relationship where perhaps there are elements of domestic violence or the beginnings of domestic violence, this message really is for the victims of domestic violence, whether they're women, men, or people in same-sex relationships.
Yes.
This podcast is very much directed to you and to you personally. And Hattie and I have talked about what we call 3 key strategies for you to think about very carefully. And in fact, these 3 key strategies were originally thought up by a very fantastic domestic violence agencies, one called the Black Sisters of Southall, who did a leaflet about domestic violence. And they set out essentially 3 keys to opening the door to freedom from domestic violence. The first one was essentially reporting the violence. The second was how to separate and get away from the violence and get protection for yourself. And the third key was how to stay safe.
All is equally as important as each other, Freya, really.
Absolutely. And we've slightly adapted those guidelines for the podcast today. But they're 3 issues which are quite straightforward, and they are parts of a key, essentially, to unlock the door to freedom from domestic violence. And firstly, Hattie has decided that we should look at how to report the violence first, because obviously that's a very important start.
Yes, no, indeed. I mean, I'm going to throw another piece of information from CNN out here before we talk about how to report the violence, Freya. And CNN reported today that a woman walked into the pharmacy in the French city of Nancy last Sunday, one of the few public places still open for the government imposed by a nationwide lockdown to prevent the spread of the dangerous virus. But the woman wasn't there for medicine. She was there to tell the pharmacist that her partner had abused her. I mean, soon after, the woman's spouses were arrested by police, and the headline on that report was that women are sort of trying to speak in code to where they can. So yes, I mean, how does a woman in a lockdown, government has locked us down due to the coronavirus, how do you report that right now? How do you report domestic violence right now, Fred?
Well, there are a lot of ways. There is always a way, and obviously you have to think very carefully what is the safest way for you to report it. I think before reporting it, what I would like to point out very briefly is that the victim has to stop blaming yourself. A very common theme in cases of domestic violence is that the perpetrator blames the victim and says things like, for example, "Look what you made me do."
Yes.
And that makes the victim feel.
In these cases, Freya, don't we?
Yes.
The victim actually says, "Look, it was my fault. I made him or her angry. That's why they did it, or I didn't do what I was asked to do." And
that's right. They feel that they're to blame, and they often feel very depressed about what's going on. They may already have some mental health issues. They may have some alcohol or drug dependency issues. And the perpetrator is obviously the person who commits the violence, uses these issues against the victim, basically, sort of beats them with these problems to make them feel that nobody will believe you, nobody will help you.
Yes, yes, and I think the bottom line is nobody should hit anybody for any
absolutely.
reason. Full stop.
That's right.
There is no,
that's right.
oh, it was an argument and that's why, or there is no reason for anybody to hit.
No justification. No. And what I think is important for victims to know is that, in fact, these are very common themes, and they're very well understood by domestic abuse agencies and by people who practice in domestic violence, and they understand that people are made to feel that way, and they're very reluctant to report. They're very ashamed of what's happening. They're very frightened about what's happening. What they have to think about is that they have actually much more to fear long term if you do not report the domestic abuse. Because the truth is, domestic abuse perpetrators will not change on their own. They will not change their behaviour. There is nothing that you can do or not do to change their behaviour. And the only way that a domestic abuse perpetrator will change their behaviour is if they accept professional help to change. They will not be motivated to make these changes unless they have to, because you have left them. And when they realise other people are beginning to know about what they have done. So you have to think that in long term, that by reporting the domestic abuse, you are obviously most importantly saving yourself and your children, if you have them, from this horrible experience. But also in the long term, you're actually helping him or her, you're helping the perpetrator to access the professional help that they actually need.
Yes.
And if you don't report the domestic abuse, I can honestly say my experience, which is quite extensive with domestic abuse victims, is that the abuse will escalate. It will escalate anyway, whatever you do, whatever you don't do, because you have a toxic dynamic in the relationship where the perpetrator holds you in this fearful situation where you feel helpless, you feel you sort of feel in their power, and that no one is going to help you. And the truth is that if no one knows, the irony is that
how's anybody supposed to help you?
They can't help you.
Aware of it.
And also the irony is that if nobody knows, the perpetrator loses more and more respect for you for not stopping it. Because at heart, everybody knows this behaviour is wrong.
Yes.
And
I mean,
obviously,
we say at heart, but you know, I've been aware of cases where people genuinely think, no, that's how I am in my culturally, or that's how my family are. This is not unusual behavior for us as a unit. You know, this is acceptable. And both perpetrators and victims sometimes do accept that.
Yes, that's right.
Possibly the victim will say, well, I can't possibly go and say I've been a victim of domestic violence because the whole family will raise up against me. And I think what we're trying to say, one of the things that we're trying to say in this podcast is there is a whole host of support out there.
Yes, a lot of support.
And networks see this information in all shapes and sizes. And there's probably not much they haven't seen.
Yes, absolutely. They've seen it all.
You will not be believed, or you won't be protected, or you won't be assisted. I think that we're very fortunate in this country, Freya, if I must say so.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
Very geared up, as long as people know where to go. So let's tell people, how do you report domestic violence whilst we're in a lockdown?
Well, the first key is to report the abuse. Always report the abuse. If you find that your phone or your internet access is being monitored, then go to somebody that you can tell. It can be anybody. Like the example, very important example that you gave of the very brave lady in France who went to the pharmacy. In this country, pharmacies and supermarkets are open. You can go to somebody there. You can go to a neighbour, even somebody you haven't spoken to before. You can obviously think about friends or family if you are in contact with them and you haven't been isolated from them. You can go to a police station, but you must tell someone that you need help. You must tell them what has been happening. Ask them to call the police. If you can find a phone box, if you have any money to call the police, but you must find a way to report what is happening to you, because that is a very key issue to beginning to stop that abuse from happening.
Yeah, it's the first
and
stage,
however
isn't
frightened you are, however frightened you are of repercussions and everything else, you are in far more danger not reporting it.
Yes.
And so find a way. There is always a way. You may have to be a little bit sly and pretend that you're going to Boots to go and get something, or to go to talk to somebody.
And of course, we're saying if your phone,
you can find a way.
We're saying if your telephone and internet is being monitored, then that's probably one of the angles, isn't it? Find somebody to tell outside of the home, whether you're trying to go and purchase something, or whether it's however it is, like you say, a neighbour or somebody. Just say, I need help. There's domestic abuse, there's domestic violence going on in my household. And obviously, if you do have a telephone, if you do have the access to the internet, then that's a direct call to the police.
Yes, it is. That's right. And the police are very helpful. I mean, they are very, very experienced in dealing with domestic abuse. It's remarkably common, sadly. And they won't only just arrest the person and speak to them, they will also give you advice about where to go to get help and other support. And very often they arrest people and they keep them in for questioning for some time. And that time can sometimes give you an opportunity to go and get a non-molestation order. The police might also think about bailing them, but giving them bail, which has conditions on not to contact you in any way, not to return to your address and things like that. They are very, very helpful. A lot of the websites have, this is something to be very careful about if somebody is really monitoring everything that you do on a computer. But a lot of the websites, the Refuge website and the womensaid website, I've actually looked into them myself and actually tried these to test them. They both have quick escape buttons that you can press while you're actually on their web page, which immediately clears the page completely.
Oh, that's
so that
cool.
It's very clever.
That's really
design.
helpful.
It's really helpful, so that if you're looking something up and he suddenly comes into the room, or you hear him coming, you quickly escape and it's gone. And then, of course, it gives you a chance to then, I would check, because one thing I didn't do was actually check my browser history. But everybody has their browser history. Check in that and clear it, just to be on the safe side. But it does give you some time where you can look things up and escape very quickly.
The one point that I want to raise at this stage, Freya, if I may, is that on our website at getlegallyspeaking.com, we have just posted on our news section, which is quite a conspicuous section for it actually at the moment, and it's titled Domestic Abuse During the Lockdown, a Practical Guide in Light of COVID-19. And Freya, together with Sarah Cooper and another pupil barrister, India Flanagan, have put together the most useful and helpful information in terms of the steps that could be taken in keeping an abuser away from you, and also telephone numbers and contact numbers that you could get in touch with to get help, like the National Centre of Domestic Violence. You can click through to read that, the womensaid domestic abuse directory, and other very, very 24-hour helplines like womensaid, refuge, victim support, national LGBT domestic abuse. There's a whole host of information there, and that's quite a conspicuous website to be looking at, because it looks very fluffy, but then we've got all this really relevant and key information. So I can only be very thankful to Freya, barrister Sarah Cooper, and pupil India Flanagan as well for that. So
thank you. Well, that's sort of moving us towards number 2. Yes, because how to separate and how to get protection, those very same agencies are extremely helpful. They are very supportive, from a practical point of view and also an emotional point of view for people. And the Refuge Domestic Violence Helpline, for example, it's a 24-hour open helpline. And it's 0808 2000 247. You can try texting Love Is to a number 22522.
That's a very
also,
conspicuous way as well, isn't it?
It is. There's the Men's Advice Line, which is 0808 801 0327. And the womensaid.org.uk website is brilliant. It's very, very helpful. You can press chat immediately that you're on it to talk to somebody, or you can email if you're too worried about talking to somebody. And it has very helpful links to direct local services. So, for example, if you're thinking about having to go to a refuge because you haven't got friends or family to stay with, particularly during this lockdown period, you can tap in your postcode and the nearest services to you come up. And as an example, I quite randomly clicked on Wandsworth to see what was available in Wandsworth, and the Hestia Shanty Women's Aid came up with a phone number and a website. And they're very, very helpful. All of these people, they want to help you. They don't want to allow you to be in a dangerous situation. And all areas have women's aid. Like you say,
during the lockdown, you know, it's such a crucial time for anybody going through any ordeal of this kind to know that they can't get out.
And some people in same-sex relationships are very worried for lots of reasons about coming forward with domestic violence. It's very underreported. And there's a number for them, which is 0800 999 5428. And all areas have women's aid or domestic abuse helplines. Scottish Women's Aid, for example, is 0131 226 6606. The Welsh Domestic Abuse Helpline 0808 801 0800, and Northern Ireland Women's Aid 0289 033 1818.
And what we're essentially saying, Freya, is that once you've reported this, you know, the police will obviously be the first point of call, or if you know, because they will probably come to the property first to deal with the perpetrator. There is ways to keep you separate. The refuges are open for business.
Yes, they are.
24-hour helplines, even during this time, are open for business. They are. During this time, don't think if you're in this sort of situation and it is, you know, you're afraid that you're going to tell the police, they're going to turn up, and then you're going to have to be in the same household as a abuser or a domestic violence perpetrator. You won't. There will be a way to keep that person separate from you, and any vulnerable children, obviously. Hopefully, if they're not involved, but if that is an issue as well. Okay, so let's talk about question 3, Freya. How to stay safe. I mean, we've mentioned already that obviously if your telephone and your internet is being monitored by somebody who's abusing you at home, then try and get yourself out to tell somebody, call the police, I've got a domestic violence, I've got an abuse situation going on. I know we've spoken about that and how to text Love Is, and we've mentioned the text number to go through in order to discreetly and you know, send out the message. What do you say to our listeners on how to stay safe during this time?
The most obvious thing to do is to get yourself to a safe place away from the perpetrator, whether it's in a refuge or with a family or friend or wherever you can go, or through the local authority. The housing associations and so on are very helpful. They have a duty to house parents with children in particular. And of course, to think about getting a non-molestation order. Some people call them injunctions. It's really the same thing.
Yes.
It's an order that is quite easy to get.
And they're quite powerful, aren't they, Freya? Because they all come with arrest orders attached to them now. So
they do. They have a power of arrest attached to them.
Yes.
And they're quite easy to get. The application to the court for a non-molestation order is free. You do not have to pay an application fee for a non-molestation order. It's made by a form called the FL401. People can, very often you can get legal aid and you can get help for representation from lawyers on non-molestation orders. There is, for example, an agency which is called FLOWS, FLOWS, which stands for Finding Legal Options for Women. And it's flows.org.uk. It has solicitors available, and it's 0203 745 7707, or flows at rcjadvice.org.uk. But if you find for any particular reason that you have to make an application yourself, it's actually quite straightforward. You can Google form FL401, Google it, download it. If you have a confidential address, for example, you're at a refuge or an address where the perpetrator doesn't know, then you must add the form C8. The form C8, again, is something you can quite easily access on the internet and download.
But there's lots of, I just want to say, Fred, there are lots of law firms that do legal aid.
Yes,
there is going to be legal help for you.
Yes,
at no cost,
because they're working
in this area of law.
There are, and they are working. The fact is they're probably not in their office, but they're working remotely from home.
Yes.
And so there's a way that you can still contact them. There'll be a phone number or an email you can contact the law firm on, and they will get back to you.
Yes.
And then basically, if you do certain form, the C8, then although the court has your details, because it's important the court has your contact details, those are not disclosed to the perpetrator. So it's important that people understand that they can make an application. It's not actually very complicated. All that it means is that it's this particular application, which is quite easy to do. With the form C8, you then do a statement. You can handwrite a statement or type up your own statement, just saying what's happened to you, why you need a non-molestation order, what sort of violence has happened. And the courts published yesterday an article confirming that they are still treating, as they always have done, domestic violence, non-molestation orders and so on with the utmost urgency. They are considered a priority at the moment because obviously
which is what the mess, we're trying to get this message out. We're trying to say, look,
yes,
the country is in lockdown, but you can still get assistance. The courts are still there to help you. You will be able to get free legal advice and free legal assistance. All the helplines, all the national help centres are open to help you. The police are very quick to act on it. And I just want to mention the New York Times reported a couple of weeks ago that the United Nations called for urgent action to combat the worldwide surge in domestic violence. And that speaks volumes. I mean, this isn't happening here in the UK. Our 25% increase of domestic abuse calls reported, as I said in the beginning of the podcast by the BBC, since the lockdown, is not just happening in the UK. It's a worldwide.
It is.
And it's on the rise in countries that have had to have the lockdown procedures in place. Freya, that's incredibly helpful. Is there anything you'd like to say? So we're now about to wrap up our podcast. Is there any closing lines or any closing?
All I would say is that in terms of staying safe, make sure that you are very careful with social media, because once you've removed yourself and you're somewhere safe, particularly if it's an address that he doesn't know where the address is, do be very careful what photos and information you publish on social media. Because there have been quite a few cases where people have been tracked down because they've had a photograph taken, for example, outside a restaurant. Even that information can actually be Googled and people can find you. So be very, very careful.
Yes, I mean, especially now, because it might not necessarily during where we are at the moment with the lockdown be outside a restaurant, but it could be in a family member's home or in a friend's home. You are in a refuge, in a place which gives the perpetrator some sort of indication of where you are, and if you don't want them to know where you are, and if you because you want to be known while the police and the CPS deal with what they need to deal with, I think that's really sound advice, because people are so natural naturally attuned to social media, shall we say.
Well, that's right. And people often publish photographs without thinking, and it may give people
Yes.
clues, somebody who's stalking. The last thing I think is to make sure that the order, if you get an unmolestation order, stick to it. Do not let the person breach the order and think, oh, it's not very serious. However minor a breach, if an unmolestation order would typically say not to contact you at all, it may say not to contact you other than 3 solicitors for the purpose of contact with the child,
But
for
that means
example.
both ways. That will mean both ways. You can't then
It does. It means both ways.
Yeah.
And also, but if there's any breach of it, however minor, report the breach to the police, because the police would have the order, and it does have teeth. And do sensible things like block the person from your WhatsApp groups, your phone and social media if you can. Assume, even if you've blocked them, that they will try and Google you and find you on Facebook and Instagram and so on. And make sure that you do not give in to any emotional blackmail, threats, or anything else about the children, because in this type of volatile situation, it's very common for perpetrators to frankly use the children as an excuse to harass the victim. And bear in mind that contact centres are generally closed. Contact centres are generally closed at the moment. And do not give in. If
contact centres, let's just quickly explain, contact centres are centres that basically get involved to help both parents have time with the children, where the parents are on a very contentious situation, or the child has not, doesn't really want to see the other parent. So they're not the help centres for domestic violence or domestic abuse. They're to help with children. Well, that's
and sometimes they're used in domestic violence situations, but that you can't use them at the moment. So probably, if any contact is safe, it would have to be indirect contact through Skype or FaceTime or something like that. And don't feel threatened or harassed into agreeing to contact that you're not happy with, that you think the children may not be safe with. Err on the side of caution and wait until you've had some legal advice and time to think before agreeing to any form of contact, because it can be used as a further form of domestic abuse.
Thank you, Freya. I'm very, very grateful for this sound advice. It's not a nice topic. It's definitely
quite
it's
chilling at the moment.
It is. It's not good. It's not a nice topic to speak about, but I'm so grateful for your time, and I'm so grateful that we've been able to bring such good information to our listeners. And also, I repeat again, on our news section, we have a very informative article put together by our barristers at Thomas More Chambers, domestic abuse during the lockdown. So don't forget to click and subscribe to our podcasts, and you can find us on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn by searching Get Legally Speaking. Also visit our website at getlegallyspeaking.com. Stay safe, keep well, and thank you very much for listening.